we're going to get started on Into the Woods. It starts on page 418 for that adventure. This adventure is primarily going to focus on things that are made out of wood or the trees around us. I'm going to be discussing these, and then we're going to be putting pictures on the screen of everything that I'm talking about here. This one you're supposed to complete requirements 1 through 4 and one of the other 3. I'm going to kind of go over all of them with you, and you guys can elect to do it however you would like. Trees and plants play important roles in nature. In this adventure, you will get to learn about the plants and trees in your community by exploring your area on a walk or visit to a local nature center, tree farm, or park. We are fortunate enough to have scouts from all over the country for this summer camp, so research what's in your area because it's going to be different than what I'm going to be talking about here in Northeast Iowa. If you've ever stood beneath a towering redwood or enjoyed the colors of fall leaves or watched pine trees swaying in the wind, you know that trees and plants are beautiful. But they are also important to life on Earth. As you go into the woods in this adventure, you'll learn what trees and plants do for us and for animals, and why taking care of them is important for our planet's well-being. For requirement 1, we're going to identify 2 different groups of trees and parts of the trees. I'm basically going to be focusing on the coniferous, which is like your evergreens, and the deciduous trees, which are like your oak, ash, hickory, and such. If you guys are in the desert or on the tundra or on the top of a very tall mountain, there are probably trees around you, even in the middle of the city, but what kind of trees are they? If you look closely, you will discover that different trees have different characteristics. Some grow very tall, while others grow out as much as they can grow up. Some keep their foliage all year round, while others lose their leaves in the fall, often after they turn brilliant shades of yellow, red, and orange. So for our coniferous trees, the seeds in coniferous trees grow in the cones, so pine cones, which is where the word coniferous comes from. When a cone scales are up, the seeds fall out and new trees can take root. Coniferous trees tend to grow tall rather than wide, and they have a triangular shape like a Christmas tree. Pines, cedars, firs, and spruces are examples of coniferous trees. We are fortunate at camp here to have a very large pine forest that was planted for us sometime in the 50s, if I'm not mistaken. Evergreens do lose their needles, they just don't lose them all at the same time. Most coniferous trees are evergreens, meaning they don't lose their leaves, which are the needles, in the fall. However, some coniferous trees like the bald cypress and larch do lose their leaves as winter approaches. Moving on to deciduous trees, so we'll start putting up some pictures here of deciduous trees. Instead of having needles, deciduous trees have wide, flat leaves that are good at capturing sunlight. They are called deciduous because they lose their leaves each year. These trees spread out as they grow, and they're often bigger at the top than they are at the bottom. Deciduous trees don't produce cones. Instead, their seeds are contained in nutshells or fruit. Oaks, maples, poplars, beeches, sycamores, and ashes are examples of deciduous trees. Maple trees have special seeds that fly to the ground like little helicopters. So I don't know if you guys have ever seen those, but we used to have a maple tree in our backyard, and we used to pick up big handfuls and throw them up in the air and watch them whirl towards the ground. A few deciduous trees are actually evergreens. The live oak is an example of that. Palm trees, which are often seen in the far southern parts of the United States, don't really fall into either the coniferous or deciduous category. They don't have cones, and they also don't drop their leaves in the fall. Those are more like a very large plant rather than a tree. A tree grows in its roots, trunk, and crown, which is its top where all the branches and leaves are. The tree needs food to grow, and its roots and leaves play a part in the process of making food. A tree's root ball is usually as wide as its branches. The crown is the upper part of the tree, including the branches and leaves. The leaves take in sunlight and use it to make food for the tree in the process called photosynthesis. The trunk is a pathway for water and minerals, food, the minerals that the tree uses for food, to move from the soil up through the trunk to the leaves. It grows outward and upward each year. As the trunk grows taller, the crown of the tree grows higher in search of more sunlight. In trees used for lumber, the trunk produces most of the useful wood. All of your minerals and water that move up a tree do that in the outer layer underneath the bark called the cambium. It's important that you don't puncture that because it's kill the tree. A lot of people that harvest wood for firewood out of a standing timber year after year will go the year before they want their firewood and what we call ringing the tree. And that's to remove all the bark and cambium in a ring around the tree so that the water and nutrients can no longer move up, and it kills the tree, leaves it standing for it to dry out for a year, and then they'll harvest it for firewood. Roots anchor the tree in the earth and help slow erosion by holding soil in place. They soak up the water, minerals, and nitrogen from the soil and send it up to the trunk, to the leaves to make food for the tree. A layer of growth cells at the tip of the roots make new roots each year. When the tree is cut down, the roots may sprout new growth to revive and perhaps bring the tree back to life. It's not going to be the case in all the trees, but oftentimes if you see a tree trunk that'll have shoots coming off of it or shoots them out of the ground to try to bring the tree back. Alright, for requirement 2, we're going to identify 4 trees common to the area where you live, tell whether they're native to our area, and tell how both wildlife and humans use them. I'm going to let you guys kind of go over this, what to check for on your own, because it's going to be so different in other parts of the country. But for us here, I know we have a lot of oak trees, and there is red oak and white oak. We have a Northern European white poplar here at camp that is not a native species that we planted years ago for shade, and we're very careful that that doesn't spread any farther than we want it to. We don't want to they were planted before we were more mindful about invasive species, so we just make sure that they don't seed or grow new trees, and the ones that we have we leave standing for the time being. We have a lot of hickory trees, especially here at camp. We have shagbark hickory, quite a bit of it, and ash trees. And ash in our area is under threat of the emerald ash borer, which we do have at camp. So a lot of our ash trees, or eventually all of our ash trees, I think, are going to be killed by the ash borer, unfortunately. So, the animals in our area, such as the squirrels and deer, will of course eat the nuts. Squirrels use it for housing, birds use it for nesting areas, beavers eat the tree bark. A couple examples in your book here: mountain lions sharpen their claws on trees, moose, elk, and deer use tree trunks or flexible saplings to rub the velvet off their antlers. They also eat tree bark, leaves, and stems. During the mating season for our white-tailed deer here in Iowa, in the Midwest, the bucks and does will both use overhanging branches to lick and put their scent on. Part of the process of their mating rituals to tell when they're ready for that here in the fall. We're going to move on to 4 plants common to the area where you live. Tell which animals use them and for what purpose. Much like trees, smaller plants and shrubs are important to animals. Bluebirds, catbirds, and mockingbird eat the berries of the holly bush. Deer, rabbits, birds, and insects feast on flowers, leaves, fruits, and nuts of both trees and plants. Hummingbirds drink nectar out of the flowers. Birds build nests in trees and shrubs. So see what you can do for research about plants in your area. Right now we have a lot of wild bergamot that is in bloom right now. That is a really good plant for the bees and the insects. Honeysuckle is a favorite for bees and hummingbirds. We have a purple coneflower that's native to Iowa here. That's an echinacea. That's a native plant that's in bloom in a lot of our ditches and areas, wildlife areas right now. And also the black-eyed Susan is a flower that's in bloom right now. It's going to probably be different where you're at, or can be different from where you're at. Requirement 4 here is to develop a plan to care for and then plant at least one plant or tree, either indoors in a pot or outdoors. Tell how this plant or tree helps the environment in which it is planted and what the plant or tree will be used for. No plant or tree lives forever. Some die of old age, and some get damaged by fire or lightning, and some are cut down to be used for lumber and other purposes. So it is very important to get permission for where you're going to be planting, but I highly recommend that you get a hold of your local municipality, whether it be the city, county, or conservation board. See where you're allowed to plant trees, and then it's for your requirement. You're only required to plant 1 tree, but I highly recommend an outing like with your troop or something. So maybe plant 1 tree for each person and then care for those. A lot of times cities are developing new city parks and stuff and need trees planted, or wildlife areas where they would like trees planted, and you guys can set something up to do that in your area. For some planting tips here, we carry the seedlings in a bucket or box, keeping the roots damp. Place the trees at least 6 feet apart and place plants at least 6 inches apart, but follow the instructions for the individual plant or tree. Dig a hole just deep enough to hold the roots. Loosen the sides and bottom of the hole so that the tiny roots can push into the soil. The roots should not be stuffed into a hole, so they need room to spread out. A seedling should be planted so that its old ground line is about 1/4 inch below the new ground level. The ground line is the dark mark on the trunk, and plants should be planted at the same ground level. So if you guys do happen to plant some trees, I'd love to see pictures of that into our virtual camps at winnebago.org website, which we'll put on the screen now. Seedling or other plant should be planted with its trunk straight up. Fill the hole with soil so it's even with the ground, and the soil should not be sunken in or molded up above the ground. Press the soil down firmly around the roots to prevent air pockets. If you don't, the tree or plant may die because the air pockets dry out the roots, preventing water and nutrients from reaching them. A newly planted seedling needs lots of water, so soak the soil around the seedling with water and then soak it again if it is planted in the ground. If you are planting in a pot, make sure the pot is large enough to allow the plant or tree to grow, which is at least double in size of the container the plant arrived in. And be sure there are holes in the bottom for drainage, otherwise it will drown the roots. It gets too much water and they will mold or rot. Put a plate or saucer underneath so it catch the extra water, so we're not making a mess. Closely follow the instructions for watering given on any tag or label. Be sure to provide food and water as required on a regular basis. Cover the ground around the base of a seedling with several inches of mulch, such as composted leaves, wood chips, grass cuttings, straw, or sawdust. This holds the moisture and it makes the soil richer for the new tree. The mulch should be flat or sloped down from the trunk to the ground. Don't make it look like a volcano. Flowering your plant or tree can help the environment in several ways. Flowering plants provide food for bees and hummingbirds. Fruit and nut trees provide food for wildlife and people. Shade trees keep the buildings cooler. Evergreen trees often shelter from winter winds. And all trees provide habitat for wildlife and purify the air by taking in carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen. Again, I highly recommend if you guys do get together as a group, see somewhere where you can plant a bunch of trees. Otherwise, if you guys are having to do it in a pot or at home, I'd still love to see pictures of it, because that's the kind of thing that I get really excited about, is when we're helping give back to nature. Somebody once said that a wise man is a man that plants a tree in which he knows he'll never sit in the shade of, which I might be fumbling that quote just a little bit, but be mindful of the future generations that need to use the public areas around you, and plant some trees for them. Plant some trees for your kids to use someday. Requirement 5 is to make a list of items in your home that are made of wood and share it with your den. Or with your den, take a walk and identify useful things made of wood. So just off the top of my head, I know my kitchen table is made of maple. My cabinets have an oak veneer. Out at camp, of course, we use a lot of picnic tables. Our dining hall is made of wood. Our cabins are made of wood. Picnic shelters, of course, are made of wood. So you can just take a look around you in your home or in your public use area, and try to identify some of those things. A couple of wood and plant uses are hickory and white ash are used to make baseball bats and tool handles. Of course, my axes are all hickory handled. Cedar is used to make porches, decks, and shingles for roofs. Different parts of the country, you guys might have a cedar shake roof. Those are super neat. Something that I've worked on myself, actually, trying to make cedar shingles. It's quite a skill that the settlers had and some of the old timers had that we're kind of losing to history, so I try to practice a lot of those skills. Mesquite and hickory chips on cooking fires flavor food, so even just your hickory smoked bacon or any, something like that. But paper is made of wood pulp. Toothpaste contains cellulose gum, which is made from wood fiber. I don't know if you guys knew that, but a lot of the stuff in your house, medications, toothpaste, that kind of thing, does contain cellulose gum. So it's, of course, non-toxic in any way. It may sound a little weird, but it's in quite a few products. Spices, a lot of you guys might not think about that. For cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla all come from a tree. The cinnamon is the bark of a tree. The nutmeg, of course, is a nut, and the vanilla is the fruit. Some candles are made from the waxy covering of the southern bayberry fruit, if you guys have ever heard of bayberry candles. And maple syrup is made from the sap of sugar maples harvested in early spring. Maple is not the only tree that you can make a syrup from, actually. I think there's people that use make a birch syrup. So that sugar-rich water that flows up the trees in the springs can be made into syrup. Requirement 6, explain how the growth rings of a tree trunk tell its life story, describe different types of tree bark, and explain what the bark does for a tree. So we'll go over each layer here, because this is super interesting stuff. The inner bark, as I talked about before, carries food made in the leaves down to the branches, trunk, and roots. It consists of hollow tubes, hollow vertical tubes, so it transports the food and stuff through capillary action in the inner bark. The outer bark protects the tree from injury, so that's why it's a little tougher. You can see here on your picture on page 430 a fire scar. A tree can be damaged by fire even if it is not burned down. Disease and insects can enter through the fire scars. Sapwood carries sap from roots to leaves. That's going to be your outer layers. The cambium, this is the thin layer of cells between the bark and the wood, is where the trunk grows every year, and each year it forms a new ring of new wood toward the inside of the trunk and new inner bark towards the outside of the trunk. Heartwood, which was originally sapwood, now inactive, gives strength to the tree. So you can see why there's a color change a lot of the time. That's the inactive sapwood that's now called heartwood. You can see here the thinning at this point nearby where trees were cut down, giving the tree more light. There were 20 years of growth before thinning and 10 years of growth afterwards. So you can see where the growth rings there expanded more quickly after the thinning was done in the woods. We're going to move on to requirement 7. Is to visit a nature center, nursery, tree farm, or park and speak with someone knowledgeable about trees and plants that are native to your area. Explain how plants and trees are important to our ecosystem and how they improve our environment. Obviously, they provide us with the oxygen that we breathe through a process called photosynthesis. It absorbs our carbon dioxide, turns it into oxygen. I'll let you guys review that. Of course, they stabilize the soil. We talked about that. So for this requirement, a lot of people aren't doing a lot of this kind of thing in the country right now, given our current state of affairs. So more and more places are putting out virtual tours and demonstrations of your local nature centers. I know a couple of our local areas are doing that, or nature reserves or nature centers are doing that kind of thing. So research the stuff that's in your area. Just, hit up your Google machine and ask to find any nature centers, tree farms, parks, that kind of thing around you, or presentations from your local rangers or conservation officers. There should be something for your area, or at least an area close to you that has a similar environment. So that'll take care of our one of our arrow of light requirements here. So I understand it's a lot of talking and a lot of pictures, but this one is pretty area specific, so I just gave you examples of things in our area. I know we have a lot of fortunate enough to have a lot of scouts from our local council, but we're also really excited to have scouts from all over the country. Interested to see what you guys can put together on that. Do some research on that, and I hope you learn a lot about your local area and environment and your local plants and trees.